The greatest tragedy of mankind, I believe, is people who have opinions about themselves or others that are in their head that are wrong.
Ray Dalio is the most successful hedge fund executive in the world. His flagship fund has netted $45 billion to investors, a return that recently placed him atop the legendary George Soros. Dalio says his success is tied to the unique culture of his company. All 1,500 employees of Bridgewater Associates are expected to embrace radical honesty and radical transparency. In fact, every meeting is taped for viewing by any employee. Would you want to work at a company like that? Dalio says it's inevitable. At your company, you have a culture of absolute honesty and absolute transparency. Can you give an example for anyone who's hearing about this for the first time of how that works internally?
I think any culture is a function of the values that people have, so you have to have collective values. What we want is meaningful work and meaningful relationships through radical truths and radical transparency. In order to have an idea of meritocracy, people have to understand what's going on. And they can't understand what's going on if they don't get to see it firsthand. So everything's taped, and then we talk about it and work it through. And the reason this came about is because we need independent thinkers, and independent thinkers are going to disagree.
There's a certain strain of management culture today that says people have strengths and weaknesses. You focus on the strengths. You're never going to fix people's weaknesses. So just leave the weaknesses aside and just focus on their strengths. You believe that you can fix weaknesses also?
Well, I think there's two questions. First of all, can you agree on what the weaknesses are so that everybody's in one way or another dealing with the weaknesses? I mean, most places would just rather talk about the strengths and they won't talk about the weaknesses. And that's bad because you won't eliminate the problems and you won't help people really get past them. Then you can deal with it in one of two ways. You can either guard your against those weaknesses in a certain way, or you can try to turn them into strengths. The greatest tragedy of mankind, I believe, is people who have opinions about themselves or others that are in their head that are wrong, and that they don't have a means of working that through to learn. Now imagine that instead of having a conflict, that you say, this is an interesting, curious conversation. How do we find out what's true? We have a process for being able to create thoughtful disagreement, and we have an app. I call it a dispute resolver. You push a button, and if there's a dispute, there's a process that you follow. Now, of course, one-on-one you can resolve a dispute, so I'm not saying you have to. But we need a process by which disputes are resolved by the right parties and then sorted through. And then that's right, when there's a decision, just like if there's a presidential election, you may not like the president, but you have to stop fighting it and you move beyond it, because otherwise you'll keep arguing about everything. Every day in meetings, there are disputes. We tap them.
Mm-hmm. You want those disputes.
Oh, it's a trip to see what comes up. You have no idea what's going on in people's minds and how radically different it is than you ever imagined until you bring it to the surface. Also, by the way, we have a rule that you're not allowed to talk behind somebody's back. Tape everything, let everybody see.
What if there are people with great ideas, but emotionally they can't handle it?
They can't be dishonest. They can't be subversive. They can be introverted, they can work their thing. There are some people who have skills and bad character. And there's some people who have bad skills and good character. There's some people who have both. Having both is great. The worst is to have people who have good skills and no character, because they're smart enough to really screw you. So I'd rather have somebody who has, good character and no skills, though I'd need both.
It takes about 18 months to work yourself into the system at Bridgewater, to get to the other side is, I believe, the term that you use. And I believe the number is something like 35% of new hires don't make it to the other side. Do you consider that? Is that a number that you focus on?
I want to get the right people at the other side, right? I mean, it's a little bit like the Navy SEALs. I mean, I think you have to have what do you want at the end, and you want to be as efficient as you can to get as many there. We are the most successful firm in our industry. There are 11,000 firms in our industry. To be a 1 in 11,000 type of company means that you're probably, when you're selecting people who in the beginning are 1 in 100 or 1 in 1,000 or something. So the process of trying to narrow that down is something we give a lot of attention, and we try to get better and better. But we're going to have to expect that there's going to be a dropout rate.
You're 1 in 11,000. You're in an industry where best ideas get priced into any kind of investment all the time. Shouldn't all 11,000 hedge funds have copied you exactly?
No. Of course not. There are lots of ways to skin a cat, so to speak. And I don't think it's a hedge fund thing. I think it's a decision-making thing. And so I think about the science of investing. And what it really taught me humility, and it taught me a process, which is I raised my odds of being successful by trying to find the most thoughtful people who disagree with me. By the way, this radical transparency is coming, and you can't avoid it.
In all of business, you think this is the natural, this is the path we're all going down.
Of course.
Yeah.
I mean, just technology is going to give it to you.
Right.
So you might as well figure out how to turn it to your advantage.
What you're talking about cuts against so much of what has been described as the millennial culture of working, of the constant praise. There is a certain tension that comes with this.
It's the opposite. This is what I mean by getting to the other side.
Once you get to the other side, it's the opposite.
Yeah, but let me tell you what getting to the other side feels like.
Okay.
And you say, whoa, it's so great that I now can be more effective because I know what my strengths and weaknesses are. It's so great that I don't have to pretend. It's so fabulous that my improvements are going to come from knowing what my weaknesses are. The other side is one of those worries that I can't work in another organization because, first of all, they won't be totally honest with me. And secondly, they won't help me guardrail me against my mistakes.
Does it worry you that if you look at some of the most successful companies, the culture doesn't often survive the founder?
Yeah, I do. That's why no individual should ever be more important than the system. I needed an idea meritocracy to succeed for 40 years. We've been doing this for 40 years. Why did I put it in place? Because I know that I can't make the best decisions alone in that way, and I know that I can't have those partnerships in that way. So I had to create a system that I'm equally accountable in the same rules as operating. Therefore, we have a system. Therefore, we have much less likelihood of any individual whimsically making their choices and so on. As long as they want to operate that way, then they will have continuity. But at the end of the day, it's up to them.
You got John Rubinstein is coming in as co-CEO in May. Would you walk through what that process was like with going to Silicon Valley, getting a storied executive within Silicon Valley, the father of the iPod, the CEO of Palm, and deciding that he was going to work within your culture?
First of all, we have a co-CEO structure. In other words, there are three people,
Right.
And I guess the best way to describe it is it's like a partnership. I don't think anything could be better than having three partners who have different skills and have a simpatico. He worked with Steve Jobs for 16 years in a crazy, competitive, creative kind of environment that's quite similar to us. He's seen all the tapes. He knows what the culture's like.
Really? What tapes do you want him to see to understand what he's getting into?
We want them to see the most difficult situations. He watched hours of all different tapes that give a complexion of all the different personalities of the different people and how they're interacting and how we encounter problems. And then, of course, he met and spent a lot of time. He spent many, many, many months getting to know each other and before we decided to make that move.
So you think he'll make it through to the other side?
Oh, I think so. I think it'll be a journey, but I think he understands it, and also working in the environments that he's been working in, I think he might enjoy this.
In the news recently, there was a disagreement that you had with another co-CEO, now a CIO, and the kind of radical honesty was now in a different light.
It's a difficulty because there's quite often a sensationalistic reaction to it. It didn't have any effect on our clients because their clients know us for so many years, so they understood. But for somebody else, it was this kind of silly thing that, I'm fighting with the other CEO, Greg, and that we're disagreeing. It didn't highlight the fact that, look, Greg and I have disagreed. He's been there for over 20 years. He and I and everybody all disagrees normally. I'm not trying to start a movement or anything. I really believe that I have something to pass along for people to consider. What they do with it is up to them.